Hello, and welcome to this session on using UOPY in a web application. In this presentation, I will be showing the examples I wrote along with the code. Hope you enjoy the demo and will find these examples useful when writing your applications. My name is Lou Tour, and I am a senior sales engineer for the multi-value products. I am happy for this opportunity to show my examples. I look forward to further enhancing them and doing another session. UOPY Web is the program that controls the web application. It uses the Python Flask module to run a web server. The endpoints shown in the middle will be where the code will start for rendering the HTML pages listed on the right. On the left side are the Python modules, and on the right side are the software components used to render the web pages. The directory for this demo has a README file with instructions on how to install the 3 Python modules if needed. The HTML pages and JavaScripts are included with the examples. I will begin the demo by showing the code for the first endpoint, /. This is where the login HTML will be rendered on a GET request. And a POST request, it will try to connect to the U2 database. If successful, it will then display the index.html showing the username. Otherwise, the login page will be displayed again with one of 2 possible error messages. The form classes used are defined above the first endpoint. The HTML page will display the form, and on submit, send data back to UOPY Web to the endpoint specified in the HTML code. Let's start the demo. In the directory that I extracted the zip file to, I type in the command python uopy web.py. This starts a web server on my computer that is listening to the port 5000. I can now open a browser and enter localhost :5000. I will now see the login page, and if I mistype an invalid server name, try to connect, I should see the generic error, which I do. So now if I type in the correct host, but an incorrect account name, I should see the other error message, which I do. So now I'll log in correctly and arrive at our menu with my user ID. This concludes our first example. I will now show you the second example, which is the subroutine example. I will now show the code at the endpoint sales chart. This is where index.html will send a request for the subroutine example. I use the UOPY connect function again to make a connection using the information from the login HTML. I am using database licenses for the connection. If I was using connection pooling, then the reconnection to the database would be even faster. If you want to use connection pooling, edit the UOPY.ini file in the directory and set the variable pool on to true. Depending on which database I will call, either the subroutine chart data UV or UD, and will have two parameters. I pass the DBMS variable to the subroutine by putting the variable DBMS in the zero array position. On the U2 server, the subroutine executes a query on the rental details file, capturing the grand totals and returns a dynamic array. I take the dynamic array and convert it to a list. I pass the list to the chart HTML to render a graph. If there is an error, the menu will be displayed. I will now run the example. The directory includes the xdemo UOPY accounts used by the examples. Refer to the README file for instructions on installing. I will now show you the next example, file read write. I will now show the code at the endpoint mempic. This is where the index HTML will send a request for the file read write example. In this example, I display on the get the memfile.html with a form that has a select field for picking a member to edit. The submit action from the memfile.html will send a post request back to the endpoint mempic. On the post, I make the UOPY.connect again to the database and use the member ID that was selected and read from the members file using the dictionary names. I then extract the data to individual variables starting at the 4th position. Note Python lists start at 0, not 1. I check if the address is a list. If it is a list, then I extract the second value and assign it to address2 variable. I display memedit.html with the memedit form filled in with the data from U2. On submit, I check if address2 has a value. If it does, I make address a list before writing the record back. I will now run the example. I select the first member, submit that, and now I have a form that I can edit. I'll go down to address 2 and put in a suite address, suite 777. I then will go up to the first name field and show you that you can try to submit the form, but I have a required data requirement on that field, so you got an error. Now I'm going to show you how you can change data that was inputted in lowercase. When writing it out, it comes back out as uppercase on the redisplay. One nice feature of using read name fields and write name fields is that any conversion code in the dictionaries will be used when reading and writing. So I can type in the state code in lowercase, but it'll be written back to the database in uppercase because the dictionary record has MCU in the conversion field. Saves me a line of code. I will now show you the next example. I will now show the code at the endpoint memsearch. This is where the index.html will send a request for the query example 1. In this example, I display on the get the memsearch.html with a form that has a text field and submit button back to memsearch. On the post, I convert the search string to uppercase. I connect again to the database and using the uppercase string, build and run a select statement on the members file with a dictionary that has MCU in the conversion field and the like filter. I check if there are IDs selected. I take the list of IDs and read the records from the members file using the read name fields again. I take the results from the fourth list position again, add column headers, and pass them to the pandas data frame. The pandas library have many functions, and one takes a data frame and converts it to HTML. I use that function and send the tables to the results HTML to be displayed. I will now run the example. That concludes this example. I will now show you query example 2 on our next slide. I will now show the code at the endpoint mem_by_state. This is where the index.html will send the request for the query example 2. In this example, I display on the get the mem_by_state HTML with a form that has a select field with state names and a submit button to endpoint display members. On the post to display members, I connect to the database, build and run a select statement on the members file, filtering on the state that was selected. I take the results from the fourth list position again, add column headers, and pass them to a Panda data frame. The Pandas library have many functions, and one takes a data frame and lets you build classes to create filtered tables. I use that function and the to_HTML and create two tables dynamically with the U2 data and send it to the results.html to be displayed. I will now run the example. That concludes the demo on query example 2. On the next slide, I will show the logout code. I will now show the code at the endpoint logout. This is where the index.html will send the request for logout. For this example, the user is redirected to the hello function, which then displays the login form. I will now run the example. That concludes the demonstration for the logout example. This concludes my presentation on using UOPY in a web application. Hope you find these examples useful. Here are other videos on UOPY that are available. Be sure to check them out. Thank you.